Welcome to the Fearless Money Management Podcast, where we empower women to take control of their finances. I'm your host, Claire Strong, and today I'm chatting with finance expert Lisa Risser, who's also a certified CPA. And today we're going to be looking at why it's so important that women have an emergency savings fund. Hi, Lisa.
Hi. How are you, Claire?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Pretty good.
Yeah, busy as usual.
Yes. Aren't we all?
Oh my God. It's us women. We just have so many balls to juggle always, don't we? And that actually brings us quite nicely to today's topic, because we're going to be discussing why is it important to have an emergency savings fund. And for me personally, Lisa, I'm very interested in this topic because, you know, sometimes I struggle to have money set aside for a rainy day, as, you know, my mum and dad would call it. But why is it so important we have that bit of cash set aside in case we need it in emergencies?
Well, it's very important. And a few of the reasons why is we could have all kinds of unexpected emergencies that we need those funds for. It could be a medical emergency, unexpected illness, or, you know, we end up out of work, a job loss. Sometimes a medical illness can cause us to have a job loss or loss of income. Or even a major car repair or house repair or something like that can come up unexpectedly. And we need to have some amount of cash available in a very short amount of time. So it's really important to have access to an emergency fund in case you need it.
It's interesting you said then about, for example, if you become ill, that can then, you know, translate into a job loss. And it sounds like some of these life situations can spiral. So one becomes, you know, a bigger situation. And so, okay, so the types of things we're talking about today are, for example, the car breaks down. You know, we need some money for that. Obviously, we need to be able to get from A to B. Something goes wrong in the house that's unavoidable. Or, as you mentioned, we have some sort of medical expense. I mean, I'm just thinking, Lisa, you know, going back to my kind of like personal experience so far, it's just life, isn't it? Life throws you curveballs. And, you know, it could be, so I'm in the season right now where my girls are both at ballet. Now, this is not necessarily an emergency, but it's an example of, you know, something that I need to have that savings because, you know, I can have an unexpected expense with them. And even things like, you know, one of my girls got injured. And so I need to go and get her x-rays. And that's the type of thing that my medical insurance won't necessarily cover. So Is that the type of thing we're discussing here, would you say? Oh,
it is. And like you said, it could be something like that. It can be an unexpected, your car breaks down. You have to have a car. So you can't just wait and save up the money for that car repair. And it's fascinating because everybody knows that we should have some amount of an emergency fund. But in 2003, there was a survey by Bankrate that found that 57% of Americans struggle to cover an unexpected expense using their savings for just $1,000. So even $1,000, they cannot cover if it's an unexpected cost. And there was a similar survey that was done by the Federal Reserve a couple of years ago that said that 32% of adults would either need to borrow money, sell something, or be unable to pay an unexpected $400 emergency expense. So this is a huge problem. And it's a significant percentage of the population. And it's not just those that are at the low end, you know, economically, the lower, you know, middle class. It affects people in all middle class levels, that they just don't have enough. And if you have funds, for example, let's say you're saving for retirement and you have money in a retirement fund, that's not easily accessible. So if you have an unexpected expense, you can't just pull out of that. You can't just pull out of your equity in your house. So you have to have some funds if something unexpected happens that you could have a way to be able to cover it. And some of these unexpected things, you just don't have the time to say, okay, I'm going to go to the bank and try to get some equity and out of my house, or I'm going to try to get some money out of my retirement account, which then you pay penalties if you do that, those sorts of things.
We're going to get into this in another episode, actually, about just kind of like how much we should be saving. But as a general rule of thumb, how much should we ideally be setting aside for this specific emergency savings fund?
The rule of thumb is really about 3 to 6 months worth of our expenses. And when we talk about expenses for emergency funds, we're talking about our basic necessary expenses. So we're not including, because if you're in a situation and it's happened to all of us, like you said, you've got a big expense that was unexpected, your car breaks down or something happens in the house that's not covered by insurance, or an illness and job loss, those kinds of things. You're not going to be worrying about your average expenses for entertainment and travel. You're just trying to make sure that you're covering your rent or mortgage and your basic living expenses that are necessary for you. So you want anywhere from 3 to 6 months is the average rule of thumb for people.
And Lisa, you're a finance expert, you're a CPA. Have you seen real life examples of how not having an emergency fund can actually impact people?
Well, yes. I mean, I can see where it's impacted people if they've had an unexpected car repair and now they can't get to work.
Mm-hmm.
They can't go pick up their kids. And it's depending upon where you live. A lot of places, you can't really survive without a car. So what are you going to do? Or if you have an unexpected illness, and it could be your illness, or maybe your spouse has an unexpected medical illness, or even a parent. Your parent has an unexpected significant medical illness. Now you got to take time off of work that might not get paid time off to take care of your parent who's ill. Those kinds of things. And so I've seen this happen where people then are in fear of losing their house, in fear of having to move because they can't afford where they live. And I know one couple that had an unexpected loss of income, and they didn't have an emergency fund, and they ended up losing their house that they owned. And they had 2 children who were around like 8, 10. They had to move back to Chicago and move in with her parents. That's a really tough thing to deal with because you didn't have those emergency funds. And we all get excited when things are going well, economically for us and our income and so forth. But it can go downhill very, very quickly if you can't just cover these types of emergencies. They can and do happen.
Well, I mean, something that, I actually should have mentioned earlier, but one of my daughters, she was suffering with anxiety and depression. And that for me kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, with hindsight, there was a buildup, but the point is she then required a lot of medical expenses. We needed to go to doctor's appointment. We needed therapists. We needed, to see the psychiatrist and everyone that's, included in that support team. And, if anyone has tried to get a therapist or a psychiatrist, they will know it's incredibly hard. I mean, psychiatrists are in very, very short supply, and especially ones that will see teenagers. And so a lot of them, aren't covered under insurance, or certainly not covered under our insurance. But it's a case of, well, I need that service for my daughter. And so I'm going to have to pay it somehow. And that is an example of how, luckily, my family situation, my husband, we do have some emergency savings, and we were able to withstand that, unexpected cost. But my gosh, if we hadn't have had that, I mean, at the time, you could have categorized that as life-saving medical care. And I just, I shudder to think if people aren't in a situation where they have that. And so it's, I think as we're all busy, we all have these things that we'd like to spend our money on. But what I'm hearing, Lisa, from a financial expert like yourself, is that we really need to prioritize emergency saving funds. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we never think that bad things are going to happen, but bad things happen to everybody. We all have situations that come up unexpectedly, and quite often those things have a financial component to it. And we need to be prepared and ready for that. And it's hard because it's so much easier to save for, vacation and do some other fun things and so forth. And sometimes a lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck, and it's just so hard to find funds to put into an emergency fund. But even if it's a little bit at a time that you're doing, just working towards that makes a huge difference. Again, there's a third of adults in this country do not have enough to cover a $400 unexpected expense. And that is so difficult. And when you have emergencies like this that happen, it's hard enough to deal with the situation of the emergency.
Yes.
Especially if it's medically related and an illness or something like what you're talking about with your daughter. There's already difficult emotions that are going on anyways when you're going through a crisis. Loss of a job. I mean, it has significant piece of just worrying. You want to worry about that part of it. But when you add to that, now you have to worry about, you don't have an emergency fund and you don't have a way to pay for these expenses. And that just escalates significantly on your emotional, and mental well-being too.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, part of this, it's peace of mind, isn't it? Because, God forbid an emergency does strike in whatever form that may take. But the last thing you want to do if you're dealing with something that's incredibly stressful is then also think, my God, I can't even pay for this. So even from the mental health point of view, having an emergency savings fund is clearly the right thing to do. I don't want to get too far into the weeds of this because, again, we have another upcoming episode where we're going to focus solely on this. But we obviously, I'm hearing that it's very important for us to have an emergency savings fund. Very briefly, Lisa, where do we start with that? I mean, what would that look like? Is that a case of us just setting something aside in a savings account, or where would that money be kept?
Well, that money can be kept when you're first starting out, you can just put it into a savings account if it's a small amount. As you start to grow that, there are high yield savings accounts. There are, you can put it into another type of investment that you could actually pull out if needed. And so there's other options for you to look at that. And I think we're going to talk about that further in another podcast, some of the specifics around that. But the biggest piece is just to start your savings. Start saving for that emergency fund if you don't have it already. And just build it up as you go through. And if you don't have that emergency fund, again, a lot of times then people will go into further debt and that can be high interest credit cards or high interest loans. I mean, we all know the interest rates on loans and credit cards are astronomical right now. And so anything we can do to stay away from increasing our debts makes a big difference, because then it costs you so much in the long run. Or people will delay their medical care if they can't afford it. You get diagnosed with something, or you have a medical issue and you're afraid to go to the doctor because you can't afford your out-of-pocket costs, or you can't afford your treatment. And so then you have worse health because you can't afford it, because you don't have an emergency fund. And then your health just deteriorates further and further and further. And now the costs are more and more and more down the line. Or people have housing insecurity because they don't have, they have a sudden job loss. They have a medical emergency. They could get evicted. Or if they own their own house or condo, they could face foreclosure if they can't pay their mortgage. All of these things can lead to significant worry, stress, anxiety, depression, and it affects your overall well-being and productivity. And so it's not something that is front of mind. We don't think about an emergency fund usually until we need it. And so we just need to stop and say we need it, and we don't have it all at once. Just get started. Just get started and have it automatically put into some account every time you get paid. So every paycheck, it just has a certain amount that always goes over into that emergency fund so that you can continue to grow it, and every little bit helps.
Well, I love what you just said, just get started. I think that just sums up, this conversation, that instead of it being something that's very overwhelming, or we feel we're so far behind with it, or it's not something that we can prioritize, if we just get started, we're halfway there.
Yeah, that's the whole key. That's the whole key.
I've got a question. Is there a particular age range or demographic that's particularly susceptible to not having an emergency savings fund, Lisa?
Well, I think obviously it's the younger generation, but the generation that they don't normally have as many, the highest potential for the need for emergency funds. But especially once you get to the age and you get married and you got kids, that's when you really need that emergency fund, especially when it comes to something with your children, because we always want to protect our kids. And if we have something unexpected happens and we don't have an emergency fund, how is that going to impact our children? Because and maybe it affects, maybe we have to move. Maybe it affects things that we can do with our kids, or the overall anxiety that we have that then we portray onto our children. And so I think the most important gap there for people is once they get married and have kids, I think that they're the ones that are the most at risk for both the need for an emergency fund and to ensure the stability of their family.
And, as moms, as women, we often, carry the load, the burden of crisis situations, and particularly as it, relates to kids. And, just from speaking as a mom myself, as I said earlier, in our conversation, just having that peace of mind that if something does go wrong, it's okay. We are going to be okay. We're not going to be financially ruined, or, I'm not going to be able to not provide that emergency care for my kid, or whatever that might be. So, yeah, I think certainly from a mom and a women's perspective, I think that it's especially important for us to have that peace of mind, because invariably lots of life's burdens are still, placed firmly on our shoulders.
They definitely are. And when we have these types of financial risks and stresses in our lives, our children feel that, and they feel that from us too. And they can sense it, and it gives them stress and anxiety as well. Even if they don't know what's going on, they feel it from their moms the most. And there's a study that was done recently that talks about the happiness and comfort of children is directly tied to the happiness of their mother, and not the father, the mother. And it doesn't matter if the parents are together or not. And so kids are very uniquely tuned in to the emotional well-being of their mother. And when their mother is emotionally healthy, and financial stress has a huge impact on your emotional stress, our children can feel that. And so we want to just keep that in mind as well. Sometimes we forget things like this, that our children, we don't tell our children about our financial stresses. We don't talk about that to them, and appropriately so. they can still feel it when we have stress, even if they don't know the reasons why or what the cause of that stress is.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I remember more times than I care to remember, frankly, where I've been stressed due to finances, but I didn't want to tell the girls explicitly what was wrong, but they could sense that I was anxious, I was stressed. And they'd ask me what the matter was. I didn't want to divulge because I just felt it was, you know, an inappropriate burden for them. But they totally pick up on especially a mum's emotions, and they're very in tune, my girls, and my emotions. And if I'm stressed financially, they definitely know about it. And as they've got older, because my girls are teenagers now, they, you know, depending how I react to even a question. So if they're wanting to order something off Amazon or something involving money, depending on my response, they know whether that's in my budget or whether that's something that's going to potentially cause me anxiety. And I don't like that. That's something I need to work on, but it just definitely goes to, you know, show the point that you're making, that when we as mums are stressed, due to finances, which are one of the most incredibly stressful situations to be in, our kids are going to feel it, whether we explicitly tell them what's going on or not. So, yeah, I mean, this is great advice, Lisa. And I think, you know, anyone listening to this who's a mom, who's, you know, really kind of acutely aware that either they haven't got an emergency savings fund started yet, or, you know, if they were questioning whether it was even something that they should focus on, I feel that, you know, just this conversation today has certainly highlighted to me the crucial need for just a backup, really, when it comes to things that could go wrong.
Yes. We hope that we're getting that message out to women to really pay attention to this and to make sure that if they don't have an emergency fund now, that they start saving and working towards that every little bit.
So that brings us to the end of today's episode of Fearless Money Management. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave us a review. Your support helps us to reach even more amazing women out there on their journey to financial freedom. Bye for now.